What we commonly refer to as ancient Greece is actually a civilization belonging to a specific period of Greek history, from the Greek Dark Ages of the 12th to 9th centuries BC to the end of antiquity, approximately 600 AD. This era was immediately followed by the early Middle Ages and the Byzantine period. In this episode, we will look at the rise of the Greek Empire, from its pre-literate beginnings to the point of its eventual fall under the might of Rome more than 2100 years ago. Greece is one in a myriad of ancient cultures that form the foundations of Western civilization. Roughly 3 centuries after the Late Bronze Age collapse of Mycenaean Greece, Greek urban cities began to form in the 8th century BC, ushering in the Archaic period and colonization of the Mediterranean basin, and was later followed by the Age of Classical Greece, from the Greco-Persian Wars to the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The conquests of Alexander the Great of Macedon led to the Hellenistic period, which ended with the conquest of the eastern Mediterranean world by the Roman Empire. Classical Greek culture, especially philosophy, had a powerful influence on ancient Rome, which carried a version of it throughout the Mediterranean and much of Europe. For this reason, classical Greece is generally considered the cradle of Western civilization, from which the modern West derives many of its founding archetypes and ideas in politics, philosophy, science, and art. The Greek Empire was one of the most important civilizations to have influenced Western societies, even into the modern era, establishing laws, creating voting rights for citizens, advancing science, and prizing the expressive arts. We can look back to this ancient society and recognize the seeds that flourished in the cultures that followed. Democracy, colonialism, military strategy, advanced education, astronomy, the art of speaking and rhetoric, and much more, all can be traced back to origins in the history of early Greek. We begin our journey by visiting the bucolic paradise that was once pre-cultural Greece, a fertile land for nomadic tribes and hunter-gatherers, wandering herds of undomesticated animals, and wild growing edible plants. The land naturally develops primitive settlements, both along its coasts and interior regions. In this era are the roots of trade. Olive trees are abundant, and regions where they grow them become highly desirable way stations for travelers and traders. As the trade routes are established, olive oil emerges as the most important currency of its time. It is during this period that the earliest form of Greek writing, a still undeciphered script called Linear A, appears in historical record. Around 1500 BCE, a more familiar-looking form called Linear B emerges. It is recognizable enough as a precursor to the Greek language that has been translated and provides a window into Greek life before more advanced settlements evolved. By 1500 BCE, prosperous tradesmen established increasingly complex and grand settlements. Certain islands in the Aegean Sea and port cities hugging the coast become sites of comfortable dwellings with signs of luxury. Nowhere at this time is more prosperous than the city of Mycenae, and not unlike today, wealth is concentrated in the hands of only a few. This privileged group includes kings and other rulers, merchants, and the priests who keep the temples running. The city becomes both a trading and a military power, and by 1300 BCE is the dominant power of the Aegean. Its wealth and influence are such that this area for approximately 1600 to 1100 BCE is called the Mycenaean period of Greek history. In the 8th century BC, Greece began to emerge from the Dark Ages, which followed the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. By this time, the Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet, modifying it to create the Greek alphabet. The earliest evidence of Greek writing comes from graffiti on Greek pottery from the mid-8th century. Greece was divided into many small self-governing communities, a pattern largely dictated by its geography, with every island, valley, and plain being cut off from its neighbors by the sea or mountain ranges. The Lelantine War from 710 to 650 BC is the earliest documented war of the ancient Greek period. It was fought between the important city-states of Chalkis and Eretria over the fertile Lelantine plain of Euboea. Both cities seem to have suffered a decline as a result of the long war, though Chalkis was the nominal victor. A mercantile class arose in the first half of the 7th century BC, evidenced by the introduction of coinage in about 680 BC. This seems to have introduced tension to many city-states, as their aristocratic regimes were threatened by the new wealth of merchants ambitious for political power. From 650 BC onwards, the aristocracies had to fight to maintain themselves against populist tyrants. A growing population and a shortage of land also seem to have created internal strife between rich and poor in many city-states. In Sparta, the Messenian Wars resulted in the conquest of Messenia and enslavement of the Messenians, beginning in the later half of the 8th century BC. This was an unprecedented act in ancient Greece, which led to a social revolution in which the subjugated population of Helots farmed and labored for Sparta, whilst every Spartan male citizen became a soldier of the Spartan army, permanently in arms. Rich and poor citizens alike were obliged to live and train as soldiers, an equality which diffused social conflict. These reforms, attributed to Lycurgus of Sparta, were probably complete by 650 BC. Athens suffered a land and agrarian crisis in the late 7th century BC, again resulting in civil strife. The Archon, or chief magistrate, Draco, made severe reforms to the law code in 621 BC, hence the term Draconian law. But these failed to quell the conflict. Eventually, the moderate reforms of Solon, 594 BC, improving the lot of the poor but firmly entrenching the aristocracy in power, gave Athens some stability. By the 6th century BC, several cities had emerged as dominant in Greek affairs: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. Each of them had brought the surrounding rural areas and smaller towns under their control, and Athens and Corinth had become major maritime and mercantile powers as well. Rapidly increasing population in the 8th and 7th centuries BC had resulted in the emigration of many Greeks to form colonies in Magna Graecia, southern Italy, and Sicily. The emigration effectively ceased in the 6th century BC, by which time the Greek world had culturally and linguistically become much larger than the area of present-day Greece. The Greek colonies of Sicily, especially Syracuse, were soon drawn into prolonged conflicts with the Carthaginians. These conflicts lasted from 600 BC to 265 BC, when the Roman Republic allied with the Mamertines to fend off the new tyrant of Syracuse, Hero II, and the Carthaginians. As a result, Rome became the new dominant power against the fading strength of the Sicilian Greek cities and the fading Carthaginian hegemony. 1 year later, the First Punic War erupted. In the second half of the 6th century BC, Athens fell under the tyranny of Pisistratos, followed by his sons Hippias and Hipparchus. However, in 510 BC, at the instigation of the Athenian aristocrat Cleisthenes, the Spartan king Cleomenes I helped the Athenians overthrow the tyranny. Sparta and Athens promptly turned on each other, at which point Cleomenes installed Isagoras as the pro-Spartan Archon. Eager to secure Athens' independence from Spartan control, Cleisthenes proposed a political revolution, that all citizens share power, regardless of status, making Athens a democracy. The democratic enthusiasm of the Athenians swept out Isagoras and threw back the Spartan-led invasion to restore him. The advent of democracy cured many of the social ills of Athens and ushered in the Golden Age. The wealth, power, and cultural influence of Athens increased steadily in the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. It sponsored the first Olympic Games in 776 BCE, and during the same decade, Homer's landmark epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are first committed to writing. During this time, Athenian government officials were elected by fellow citizens rather than appointed. Its citizens accumulate wealth and form mini dynasties and pass their land and other valuables from generation to generation. However, by the middle of the 7th century BCE, the importance and power of Athens comes to be challenged by its rival, the Dorian city-state of Sparta, which has become the preeminent military power in the area. Athens was known for its support of the arts and culture. Sparta, however, is quite a different story. The ruling class of Sparta views itself not as citizens of their land, but as marauders who invaded the Dorian region and took it over, enslaving the native inhabitants whom they called Helots. Athenians also owned slaves in this era, though not in the same numbers and not in the same mindset as the Spartans. As an invading presence, the Spartans became wealthy by living off the work of the Helots, who outnumbered them 10 to 1, and as a result, they remained constantly on guard against the possibility of a slave rebellion. All Spartan men are required to defend their city-state, and their military prowess becomes second to none. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta and their extremely divergent cultures continued for centuries. It took quite some time for the recognizable democracy to evolve in Athens, but its seeds were planted during this period. In 594 BCE, Solon became an archon, or magistrate, of Athens, and instituted some radical changes. First, taking a broad brush to a problem caused by a trade imbalance, all debts are cancelled for the peasants of Attica, the region in which Athens is situated. Second, it is made illegal to enslave debtors. And third, all citizens are now entitled to participate in the ecclesia, the body that elects archons. Near the end of this century, in 508 BCE, a new Athenian ruler, Cleisthenes, effects more political reform. Every citizen is given a voice in the demos, the local council in towns and villages. Athens is also becoming more intellectually advanced. Schools are formed for the children of citizens, and the new job description of philosopher becomes widely used. Beginning in the mid-6th century BCE, Persia, arriving from the east, makes trouble for the city-states through a series of sorties and full-scale wars. To resist the Persians, the strongest two city-states, Sparta and Athens, maintain a fragile alliance. These two powers are by no means natural allies, but they perceive the threat posed by the Persians as existential, and are determined to stay united for the course of the ongoing conflicts. In 499 BC, the Ionian city-states under Persian rule rebelled against their Persian-supported tyrant rulers. Supported by troops sent from Athens and Eretria, they advanced as far as Sardis and burnt the city before being driven back by a Persian counterattack. The revolt continued in 494, when the rebelling Ionians were defeated. Remembering that Athens had assisted in the Ionian revolt, the Persian ruler Darius assembled an armada to retaliate. Though heavily outnumbered, the Athenians defeated the Persian hordes at the Battle of Marathon, and the Persian fleet turned tail. 10 years later, a second invasion was launched by Darius' son, Xerxes. The city-states of northern and central Greece submitted to the Persian forces without resistance, but a coalition of 31 city-states, including Athens and Sparta, were determined to resist the Persian invaders. At the same time, Greek Sicily was invaded by a Carthaginian force. In 480 BC, the first major battle of the invasion was fought at Thermopylae, where a small rearguard of Greeks, led by 300 Spartans, held a crucial pass guarding the heart of Greece for several days. During this time, Gelon, tyrant of Syracuse, defeated the Carthaginian invasion at the Battle of Himera. The Persians were decisively defeated at sea by a primarily Athenian naval force at the Battle of Salamis, and on land in 479 at the Battle of Plataea. The alliance against Persia continued, and by 460, Persia had been driven out of the Aegean. The Persians come perilously close to success in the invasion of 481, but the allied forces of Greek city-states repelled them with victories on sea and land, eventually pushing them back to Asia. Finally, after much death and destruction, in 448 BCE, Persia agrees to a peace treaty, ending conflict on all fronts. But peace was not to last. Join us next week for part 2 of the story of ancient Greece, the events that triggered its decline, and the incredible legacies left behind, right here on the Pain of Progress.